I am now in jail in Israel. I wish to tell the story here and comment on what has happened.
So spoke Adolf Eichmann, SS officer, war criminal, and one of the major figures responsible for the murder of millions of Jews in the Second World War.
I have seen hell and death and the devil and the senselessness of destruction. I have seen the horrors of the operation of the machinery of death, and I have seen those who supervised the work and its execution. It was the greatest and most terrible dance of death of all times.
These words are from the memoirs Eichmann wrote in prison in 1961. Unexpected words from a devout Nazi. Had Eichmann changed his views since the war, or were the sentences written out of fear? But in conversations recorded in secret in 1957, he painted a very different and contradictory picture to the one he presented in his prison memoirs. Kept secret for almost 40 years, what do they tell us about the real Adolf Eichmann? In 1960, agents from Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service, kidnapped Eichmann from a suburb of Buenos Aires, where he'd been living after fleeing Germany. Almost a year after his capture, 54-year-old Eichmann was put on trial in Israel, charged with 15 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
האם אתה מודה או אינך מודה בפרט האישום הראשון?
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
To all charges, Eichmann pleaded not guilty.
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
האם אתה מודה או אינך מודה בפרט האישום ה-15?
Im Sinne der Anklage nicht schuldig.
As the trial was internationally televised, the world learned of Eichmann's role in the Holocaust.
היה מפעיל תווי גזים. שיחת טלפון שלו מסיעה רכבות אל מרכזי השמדה. חתימתו הוא גוזר את דינם של אלפים, רבבות ומיליונים.
Ich erkläre aber auch hierzu.
During the trial, Eichmann told the judges he wanted to write a book about his change of heart.
Dass ich nach dem Prozess diese Sachen in Form eines Buches frei aushandelnd festlege, und da bin ich bereit, das Kind beim Namen zu nennen, schon als abschreckendes Beispiel für die jetzige und für die kommende Generation.
Shalom Nagar was Eichmann's personal guard. He sat with him continuously in his cell and watched over him as he wrote his prison memoirs. He was also the man who hanged Eichmann in 1962.
זה דירת אייכמן קראו לה. הייתה פינה, הייתה לו עם שולחן וכיסא, ובאמצע היה מיטה שלו, הייתה מיטה שלו שמה, שהיה יושן, מגיע הזמן שהיה יושן, וכל היום היה כותב שמה, זיכרונות. היו מביאים לי חומר לתת לו, אז היה אומר לי תודה רבה בספרדית, קרסס. הוא ידע שאני ספרדי, הוא ידע בדיוק מי אשכנזי, מי ספרדי, הוא ידע איפה. אז הוא היה אומר לי קרסס.
Eichmann intended to call his book Götzen, Graven Images, and explain how his beloved gods had turned into fallen idols, He said he would speak frankly. Above all, he claimed that with time he had rejected all the values of his old world. He opened his prison memoirs with a description of his childhood.
I entered this world on the 19th of March, 1906, in Solingen, in the Rhine region, as the eldest son of Wolf and Maria Eichmann. While I was still a young boy, my parents moved to Linz on the Danube in Upper Austria.
This is Linz today. In Eichmann's childhood, it was different. He remembered it as a quiet river town of many charms. His parents were lower middle class and members of the Protestant church. The family, including Eichmann's 3 brothers and a sister, lived near the town center. Discipline at home was strict and rigid, but Eichmann wrote,
I was educated from earliest childhood in the need for freedom of the spirit and personal freedom. The strong needing to stick up for the weak had been drummed into me by my father.
While his father worked in an electrical company, Eichmann attended the Kaiser Franz State School, the same school Hitler had attended only a few years before. It was here that Eichmann was often called the little Jew boy because of his dark looks. He never properly finished his schooling and left with no qualifications. After leaving school, he held a series of unpromising jobs before becoming a traveling salesman for the Vacuum Oil Company. His job? To set up fuel stations in Upper Austria.
Supplying kerosene took me into places where modern life and high speed hadn't yet penetrated. There were dreamy districts like Mühlviertel, where the people were still living as they had been 50 or even 100 years before.
While pursuing a rather unsuccessful career in Austria, Eichmann watched events in Germany with fascination. Hunger and poverty were rife, with Germany traumatized by its humiliating First World War defeat, much of which was blamed on the Jews, the socialists, and political betrayal. On the extreme right, Hitler's National Socialists, the Nazis, were taking full advantage of the turmoil. Watching from a distance, the energy and promise of the party attracted Eichmann.
They told young people like me all about the betrayal, the knife in the back, and all of this entered my blood. The propaganda told us there was a political party promising to pull the dagger out of the wound. They were constantly preaching equality and an end to unemployment. What young man with nationalist tendencies would have failed to be drawn in?
At a mass rally staged by the Austrian Nazis in Linz, Eichmann was approached by a young SS officer called Ernst Kaltenbrunner, a lawyer and friend of Eichmann's father. Shortly after, Eichmann joined both the Nazi Party and the SS, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's personal bodyguards. Schooled in racial hatred and virulent anti-Semitism, their aim was to preserve the purity of the German race. Their guiding vow, absolute loyalty to the Führer. This was the group that Eichmann joined in 1932. He was 26 and going nowhere. Now he had a uniform and authority. A different path was opening up for him.
Before me was the unknown future, but serving the gods and my homeland was the most important thing for me. And I did serve them. No sacrifice was too great for them. No effort too much.
Eichmann had joined the party at the right moment. In January 1933, Hitler became Reich Chancellor. And in the elections a month later, he received an overwhelming 44% of the vote. Hitler was master of Germany, and Eichmann, SS number 45326, his loyal servant. Under Hitler, anti-Semitism was officially adopted as the predominating ideology of the Reich. In April 1933, a boycott of Jewish shops and businesses was publicly proclaimed. How much of this did Eichmann notice? When the SS and Nazi Party were temporarily outlawed in Austria, Eichmann was ordered to Germany for training. Set up in 1933, Dachau concentration camp was only a few miles away from the picturesque city of Munich. It was here that Eichmann came in 1934 to complete his SS training. He'd been promoted to the rank of Unterscharführer, or sergeant.
When I heard that the security service was taking men, I said to myself, this looks good to me. I'll be where the action is. I'll have to keep my eyes open.
He asked for a transfer to Berlin. But in Berlin, he was not at the center of the action. Far from it. As a filing clerk, his job involved investigating Freemasons and other Nazi enemies.
My first assignment had been extremely dull, sorting a huge card index of Jews, Freemasons, members of various secret societies, and other subversive elements in the Reich.
At the top of the list of enemies Eichmann had to deal with were the Jews. Maybe here was an opportunity for promotion.
When the Jewish section was set up, they looked for people. I showed interest, but I was never anti-Semitic. I have Jewish relatives.
Jews had lived in Germany for over 1,000 years. They'd fought for Germany in the war and had played a major part in rebuilding the country after 1920. Though they represented less than 1% of the population, the Nazis depicted the Jew as the supreme enemy, more vicious and despicable than even the communists. In 1935, the first of the Nuremberg laws established the legal basis for the persecution of the Jews. They were deprived of the vote and made second-class citizens. Marriage between Jews and Gentiles was forbidden. Later, Jews were excluded from economic activities and universities and subjected to increasing racial humiliation. Against this background, Eichmann's new job soon consisted of exclusively investigating Jews and Judaism.
My main job was to read professional periodicals. Huge piles of paper were put in front of me, and I got mad when I couldn't read the Jewish papers. That is why one day I went to a bookstore and bought a book to study Hebrew.
By chance, he'd landed in the one area where there were few experts, but an area that would be enormously important in the coming years. Eichmann's observations had only one purpose: to provide raw data for future actions against the Jews. Gradually, he became the Nazi Jewish specialist and even attracted the attention of Reinhard Heydrich, the head of the Reich security services.
My chief, General Heydrich, encouraged me to study and acquaint myself with its theological aspects. I must confess I did not greet this assignment with the apathy of an ox. I was fascinated by it.
קיבלתי את הרושם אז שהוא שומע על עניינים ורוצה, מה שחשבתי אז, להבין את המצב אצלנו.
In his enthusiasm, Eichmann even invited Jewish leaders to his office.
נתן לי לשבת. אז היה לי הרושם שהוא רצה ללמוד דבר מה, זאת אומרת להתעניין בפרטי פרטים. הייתי צריך להסביר לו מה נניח האדוקים שמחוץ המסגרת של הקהילות הרשמיות, האוסטריץ-אורתודוקסי, מה העניין עם המפלגות הציוניות, פועלי ציון, ומה זה ומה אחר.
But as a fugitive in Buenos Aires, in secret recorded conversations with Dutch Nazi journalist Willem Sassen in 1957, Eichmann revealed that these inquiries did have an official purpose.
This centered on finding out whether a person was a Gentile or a Jew. If he turned out to be a Jew, we were the authority that deprived him of his German citizenship and property and ultimately declared him an enemy of the state.
The purpose at this stage was to force Jews to leave Germany of their own free will. His inquiries delved into every corner, and in his prison memoirs he disclosed a well-kept secret which he hadn't revealed before.
My experience in this field was often of a confidential and embarrassing nature, as when I established that the Führer's diet cook, who became his mistress, was 1/32 Jewish.
The diet cook was Eva Braun. The discovery, dynamite. Reinhard Heydrich suppressed all documents relating to the matter, and the origin of Hitler's mistress later became one of the best-kept secrets of the Reich. In 1935, Adolf Eichmann was 29. He had a promising job and a good future. Now it was time to start a family. He found a girl from the Sudetenland called Vera Liebel. Like every SS officer, he had to submit his future wife's baptism certificate and proof of her racial purity for the approval of his superiors. Without such proof, the marriage would be prohibited. This is Eichmann's personal SS file containing all the documents relating to his marriage. What can be seen here is the authorization of Eichmann's superior. Although Eichmann got married in church, there was no room in his life for Christianity. Like many in the anti-religious SS, Eichmann had left the church and belittled his wife's Catholic devotion.
I once tore my wife's Bible into pieces and threw it away. Then she took a second Bible, and again I tore it into pieces. Now my wife is reading from the 2 pieces, and I'm letting her go on. I do everything for my wife, as I do everything for Germany.
National Socialism was his religion, and Hitler his messiah and savior. In 1936, Hitler appointed Heinrich Himmler chief of the entire German police, while still remaining head of the SS and Eichmann's boss. Together with Heydrich, head of security, Himmler started building a major organization which would deal with intelligence gathering, intimidation, police work, and brutal arrests. In those dark years, people huddled together, whispering between prayers, wondering where destiny was leading them, not knowing their names were already marked on Eichmann's lists.
בחקירתך במשטרה אמרת שלא אמרו לך שאביך בוגד, היית יורה בו במו ידיך. זה נכון?
Wenn er Verräter gewesen wäre an
Nein,
Deutschland,
wenn
jawohl.
der Reichsführer Ihnen gesagt hätte.
אילו היה בוגד, לא, אילו היה אומר לך ככה רייכספיהרר.
Hätten Sie ihm erschossen, Ihrem eigenen Vater?
Dann setzt es voraus, er hätte mir es nachweisen müssen. Wenn er es nachgewiesen hätte, wäre ich verpflichtet gewesen, gemäß meinem Fahneneid.
After depriving the Jews of their civil and economic rights, the Nazis now turned to expulsion. The Middle East was one area considered for Jewish resettlement. While investigating these possibilities, the opportunity arose for Eichmann to visit Palestine in 1937. These newly discovered files on Eichmann, secretly held by the Stasi in East Germany, testify to Eichmann's work. They discuss the sending of German spies to Palestine and Eichmann's involvement with Zionist emigration bodies.
A Jewish public figure came from Palestine, and I was given the job of taking care of him. We dined and talked at the Traube restaurant near the zoo. I was interested in Zionist life in Palestine. At the end of our meeting, my guest invited me to meet him in Palestine.
Eichmann was ordered to accept the invitation and traveled under the cover of editor of a Berlin newspaper. He boarded a boat at Hamburg and, after a leisurely voyage and several stops along the Mediterranean, arrived in Palestine. Jews had been flocking to Palestine to rebuild the land since the late 1880s. When Eichmann visited in 1937, the Zionist movement was already well established. But suspected by the British authorities of being a spy, Eichmann only stayed 6 hours in Haifa.
From a professional point of view, I must admit my mission to the Middle East was a failure. However, I was greatly enriched personally by what I saw. I saw enough to be very impressed by what the Jewish colonists were building up. I admired their desperate will to live. The more so since I myself was an idealist.
Police Inspector Mickey Goldman interrogated Eichmann in prison.
המטרה שלו הייתה להכיר את היישוב, להיפגש עם הקונסול הגרמני, להיפגש עם המופתי, חאג' אמין אל-חוסייני, שכבר אז שיתף פעולה עם הנאצים, אבל לא נתנו לו לרדת והוא המשיך לקיירו. ושם הוא נפגש עם חאג' אמין אל-חוסייני. דרך אגב, זו לא הייתה הפגישה היחידה שלו. ביומן של המופתי, הוא כותב שם ביומן שלו בערבית, אייכמן תכשיט הידיד הגדול ביותר של העם הערבי.
Palestine had allowed Eichmann to spread his wings. In November 1937, he found himself at another turning point when he was promoted to Untersturmführer, the equivalent of lieutenant. 3 years before, he'd been a nobody. Now he was an officer, a member of the prestigious but ominous SS Führer Corps. When Hitler marched into and annexed Austria on the 13th of March 1938, he and his troops were greeted by many as sent from heaven.
באתי הביתה, ואז הם שמעו את היטלר שצורח שם, ושההורים היו לגמרי מפורקים ואומרים, הנה זה הסוף. היטלר בא, יש אנשלוס.
Als Führer und Kanzler der deutschen Nation und des Reichs melde ich vor der deutschen Gerichte nunmehr den Eintritt meiner Heimat in das Deutsche Reich.
באו ה-SA באמצע הלילה והוציאו אותנו מהמיטה. אנחנו פתחנו אבא פתח וכבר סירת לחי. דרקיגר יהודה. יודנגזינדל, שוויינה, ואחר כך הם ירדו לגראז' ושם עמד אוטו, וכמובן מיד לקחו את האוטו.
Beyond degradation, Nazi policy towards the Jews of Austria was to strip them of their personal possessions and force them to emigrate. The policy was new. Vienna would be the testing ground. Austria was to be Judenfrei, Jew-free, and the policy director? Adolf Eichmann. 6 years earlier, Eichmann had left Austria an unsuccessful nobody. Now he was back, a uniformed officer of the Reich to deal with the country's Jews. Vienna was to be the breakthrough for Eichmann, where he would prove himself to be an efficient, creative, and independent administrator.
I found Jewish life in Austria completely disorganized. Most Jewish organizations had already been closed down by the police and their leaders placed under arrest. I called in the local Jewish leaders and established a main office for Jewish emigration. It was located in the Rothschild Palace in Prince Eugene Strasse.
The purpose of Eichmann's new department was clear from its name: the Central Office for Jewish Emigration. Here he established the Eichmann system, a smooth, efficient emigration assembly line.
You put in a Jew at one end, and as he passes through the building, he is stripped of everything, so that when he comes out, he has no house and no money, and only a passport and a visa to leave immediately.
When it suited him, Eichmann would manipulate the Jewish organizations and the Jews themselves to achieve his ends. Teddy Kollek was a Zionist envoy to Vienna. He met Eichmann to plead that 10,000 Jewish youngsters be allowed to leave Austria.
הוא בווינה ישב בארמון של הרוטשילדים. אני נכנסתי לחדר ושם ישב קצין צעיר שידע מה שהוא רצה. ואמרתי, הנה, יש לי רשימה של 10,000 מקומות עבודה באנגליה, והוא אמר לי שהוא מוכן לתת להם לצאת אם יהיה להם לאן שהוא לצאת.
By granting the visas, Eichmann had deported another 10,000 Jews from the Reich. The files on Eichmann, formerly held by the Stasi, describe Eichmann's work. 100,000 Jews, over half of Austria's Jewish population, were forced into exile. 500 committed suicide. Throughout the country, 700 towns were soon flying a white flag, sending the message that they were now Jew-free. In recognition of his work, Eichmann was promoted again in September 1938 to Obersturmführer, first lieutenant. While forced emigration continued in Austria, the situation worsened for the Jews of Germany. State-supported terrorism was shamelessly used to stimulate expulsion. On the evening of the 10th of November 1938, throughout Germany and Austria, over 200 synagogues were destroyed, 7,000 shops looted, and 30,000 Jewish males sent to concentration camps. It was referred to as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. On the 30th of January 1939, Hitler hinted that expulsion might not be the ultimate act of tyranny.
Ich will heute wieder ein Prophet sein. Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
It was the first time the murder of Jews as state policy was publicly mentioned. But in his prison memoirs, Eichmann claimed he did not take the speech seriously.
Der Führer trifft vor der Kolloper ein.
In my opinion, on the 30th of January 1939, there was not a single person in all Germany who seriously thought about physical extermination of the Jews. We subordinates in the SD Central Office believed that Hitler's speech was meant purely for propaganda.
Faced with Hitler's threats, the European powers followed a policy of appeasement. On the 29th of September 1938, the German-speaking area of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, was transferred to Germany. With the success of the Viennese Center, Eichmann was ordered to set up a similar office in Prague. As in Vienna, it would be dedicated to expropriation and expulsion. The Treasury Ministry in central Prague became the Gestapo headquarters. And it was from here for 6 years that Eichmann would lead the battle against the Jews. At first, Eichmann was not happy about leaving Vienna. The office was running smoothly and efficiently. Prague was a much smaller operation, almost a step backwards. Jewish leaders were even sent to Vienna to learn the Eichmann system. Soon everything was working smoothly, and Eichmann began to see Prague in a new light. In his memoirs, Eichmann would look back at Czechoslovakia and Prague with a romantic nostalgia. For him, Prague was the golden city on the Moldova, worthy of being his second home. The bridges would be remembered, the sparkle of the water, the ancient courtyards and the feel of 500 years of history in the sleepy streets and winding alleys. But Eichmann came with a mission: to deport the country's Jews. He quickly applied the assembly line system that had proved so successful in Vienna. Between March and August 1939, 25,000 Jews emigrated from Prague. As in Vienna, Eichmann used the Jewish leaders to obtain his goals, and at the same time seized their property. One of those leaders was Solomon Kramer.
הדוד שלי היה לעתים קרובות פוגש את אייכמן והיה מעביר את כל ההודעות ודרישות והגזרות שהיו צריכים למסור את כל הזהב וכל הכסף ורדיו וכל דברי ערך שהיו בתוך הבית, כן? אז אייכמן קרא את הדוד שלי לפראג כדי לארגן את כל הרכוש הזה שנשאר. כל בתי הכנסת וכל מיני מחסנים שהיו בפראג. כל מחסן היה מיועד לאיזשהו דבר. תמונות, וילונות, כן? היה מחסן של תמונות, אבל לא תמונות סתם, זה תמונות יקרות. היה מחסן של שטיחים, של כלי מיטה, של כלי מטבח. והגרמנים שנשלחו מהרייך לתוך פרוטקטורט, היו מקבלים את הדירות, והיו עוברים בכל המחסנים האלו, וסידרו להם מחדש דירות לפי טעמם. מסיר לילה עד לתמונה הכי יקרה בחינם.
For years, Hitler had been preparing for war. Now his sights were on Poland. Eichmann remembered the moment well.
On the 1st of September 1939, German divisions began to cross over into Poland. Our air squadrons bombed forward Polish positions.
Suddenly, unthinkably, the world was at war. Germany had launched its Blitzkrieg, its lightning war. While most of Poland wept, the invading troops were also received with enthusiasm in some of the German-speaking areas of the country. But for the Jews, the darkest hours were upon them, and Eichmann would be their messenger of death. By the late 30s, there were over 2 million Jews in Poland. Many lived in the shtetl, the market towns, others in cities like Warsaw and Lodz. For the Nazis, Jews and Poles were Untermenschen, subhuman. When German troops entered Krakow, the ancient capital of Poland, it contained 60,000 Jews, a quarter of the city's population. The terror actions began immediately, with robbings, brutal beatings, and murder, setting the path for the future.
At one of the railway stations in the east, I saw a soldier from the Waffen-SS burn the beard of an Orthodox Jew with a lighter. Although it was none of my business, I reported him immediately to his commander and asked that he be punished.
Actions which would be shocking even within a Nazi-dominated Germany could be carried out with impunity in distant Poland. Eichmann recalled the critical early days.
On the 30th of October, Himmler published the following order. During the months of November and December, as well as January and February 1940, approximately 1 million Jews must be transported to the Polish areas captured in the east.
From Western Poland, Jews were to be deported east. In these captured territories, they had to be concentrated in areas where there were good railway connections. The railway factor was essential, and Eichmann, the consummate administrator, was the expert who would implement a system.
I was given the responsibility for transport and dispatching. Heydrich was the commander, and I was in charge of emigration and transports, according to the orders, to clear the new eastern provinces of Germany. All this time, I was in the position of specialist.
But where could the multitude of Jews go? Deportation, as in Vienna, was no longer viable. Eichmann proposed a solution. Transport several thousand Jews to an isolated, inhospitable area of Poland. All it had was a railway connection. The name of the area was Nisko, south of the River San, near Lublin. Heydrich approved the idea. Eichmann dreamed it might even become a small Jewish province, with himself in command. Eichmann even waited in person at the train station for the first Jews to arrive in Nisko on the 18th of October 1939. Among the hundreds who came that day was Ariel Olter from Czechoslovakia.
Eichmann
לקח את האנשים שהגיעו הראשונים, לקח לאיזה אפל, לספירה, ודיבר איתנו שאנחנו נהיה פה. במקום הזה יהיה פעם מדינה יהודית, שאנחנו הראשונים פה, ואנחנו צריכים לעבוד על דברים שיהיה פעם בשביל היהודים לטובה.
Though more deportees came from Czechoslovakia, the badly planned project never got off the ground. But Nisko showed Heydrich's growing confidence in Eichmann. Nisko was a sideshow to the main event in Poland, the rebirth of the ghetto. Heydrich's orders to concentrate Jews in closed areas resurrected the practice of the hated medieval ghetto. One of the first ghettos to be set up in Poland was in Lublin, close to Nisko. Eichmann visited it frequently. It was here that the Jews of Lublin and the surrounding towns were incarcerated. The main idea was to enclose them in one space and limit their movements to a few hours a day. The buildings of the ghetto still stand intact in one of the slum areas of the town. And although there are no more Jews living in Lublin, this area is still called the Jewish ghetto. Of the 120,000 inhabitants of Lublin, a third, 40,000, were Jews. This number increased when thousands more came to escape the Nazis. When German troops entered Lublin, they immediately forced the Jews who lived on the main street, Krakowskaya, to move out of their homes. The houses were confiscated and the Jews forbidden to leave town. The Jews of Lublin were also the first to be forced to wear the Jewish Star of David. A month later, all Polish Jews above the age of 10 were ordered to wear on their right sleeve a blue Star of David at least 10 centimeters wide. In his recorded secret conversations with Willem Sassen in 1957, Eichmann claimed to be partly responsible for the use of the Jewish emblem.
It may have been the propaganda ministry that first thought up the idea of forcing all Jews to wear a yellow star on their clothing. I naturally took part in the administrative details. The marking was intended to hinder assistance to the Jews who were being harassed.
Meanwhile, Eichmann's main role was to provide transport to the ghettos. In his prison memoirs, however, he downplays his involvement.
I would not say I originated the ghetto system. That would be a claim too great a distinction. The father of the system was an Orthodox Jew who wanted to remain by himself. The assimilated Jew was, of course, very unhappy about being moved to a ghetto. But the Orthodox were very pleased with the arrangements, as were the Zionists. The assimilated Jews found ghetto life degrading, and non-Jews may have seen an unpleasant element of force in it. But basically, most Jews feel well and happy in their ghetto life.
Later came the sealing of Warsaw's ghetto, confining nearly 500,000 people into an area only a few miles wide. Many Jews were sent there from other European cities. Conditions were appalling. Dozens to a room, no sanitation. The starving haunted the streets. Others died from raging epidemics. But Eichmann had his quotas and his schedules.
והיו משפחות שמתו ברחובות, על המדרכות. כיסו אותם בנייר, בבוקר היו עוברות יחידות, שאספו אותם. ולא קברו אותם, כל אחד בקרב ישראל, אלא בבעות כאלה.
Dr. Yisrael Gutman was a teenager in the Warsaw Ghetto and a member of the Jewish underground.
שמי ישראל גוטמן.
גוטמן?
ישראל גוטמן, כן.
לא היה ברור מה קורה. הם מתכוונים לרצוח את כל יהודי אירופה. אנחנו רק הראשונים בתור, וזה צפוי לכולם. אייכמן זה היה הצייד היהודים הראשון בתוך הלהקה הזאת. ידענו שצריך להתחבא ולברוח ולא ליפול לידיהם. אני יכולתי כשאני עשיתי את זה לבדי. גם לא הייתה לי כבר משפחה. הייתה אחות.
הוא לא התחרט שום דבר. שום דבר לא היה אפשרי לראות. הוא היה שקט, הוא היה כמו איש נורמלי. רק העיניים בלטו, קרות כאלה.
This absorbing new appraisal of Adolf Eichmann concludes tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. In just over a minute, it's a case of High Hitler, with revelations of how the Führer became more and more dependent on drugs of varying sorts and strengths, from aspirin to cocaine, as his Third Reich tottered. They were all willingly supplied by his keen-to-please half-Jewish doctor Theodor Morell, who built up a special relationship with the dictator as he became frail and gripped by uncontrollable tremors.